This is not Crash Bandicoot. You're probably saying, well duh, this is Crash Bandicoot, and you're right. But funny enough, Sony was pushing for Knack to be its next Crash Bandicoot. From its debut in 1996 on the original PlayStation, Crash Bandicoot became a household name and was one of Sony's iconic mascots to help push the PlayStation console to the successful powerhouse it would become. Unfortunately for Sony, Crash Bandicoot was never and would never be their own IP. As soon as the PlayStation 2 arrived, Crash Bandicoot became a multi-platform series, and the former PlayStation icon was no longer in Sony's control. It was during the 7th generation when Sony's high with the PlayStation brand would hit an all-time low with the PlayStation 3. Its 2006 launch was horrible thanks to its price point.
20GB PlayStation 3 will retail for $499 US. The 60GB PlayStation 3 for $599 US.
It was difficult for developers to develop games for the system, and the Xbox 360 launched a year prior with a strong start. It wasn't until 2009 when Sony rebranded the PlayStation 3 with the launch of a slim version that Sony was able to salvage its failing console into one of the greatest success stories out there. However, Sony could not repeat the same mistakes again with the launch of the PlayStation 4. It needed a welcoming price point, it needed to be developer friendly, and its games needed to show the power of the PlayStation 4. Now, I highly doubt Knack was any help for the early success of the PlayStation 4. Knack would be one of two major first-party titles on the PlayStation 4's launch day in November 2013. It was a highly advertised must-have, a return to the platforming days of old that were at the time not as popular as it once was, as first-person shooters and open-world games continued to grow in their popularity. Developed by Japan studio, Knack gained traction due to its collaboration with Mark Cerny, a frequent consultant with PlayStation and a lead designer on various PlayStation hardware like the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5. He also helped Crash Bandicoot in its early PS1 days, among other PlayStation titles through the years. Knack would mark the first time Cerny would write and direct the game, and honestly, it shows. Cerny himself would describe the game as a mix between Crash Bandicoot, Katamari Damacy, and God of War. Knack himself is reminiscent of Crash Bandicoot's design, at least in his smallest form. You have the collection of bits and pieces that can attach to Knack that can also be lost during combat, thus increasing and decreasing his size similar to Katamari Damacy. Then there's the camera angles and the combat and controls that are similar to older God of War games. It's good to have inspiration, but Knack never truly feels like it knows what it wants to be. It just pulls in all these things into its package and that's about it. Knack doesn't have the best story and is largely forgettable. It's a full story from beginning to end, but it's a story you've heard plenty of times before. A bare-bones story of good versus evil, with good not having much difficulty overcoming evil. Its characters are predictable, especially the villains. The twists and turns are predictable, and there isn't anything to surprise the player. Predictability isn't entirely bad. With some surprises or memorable moments it can work, but with Knack it's almost brainless. The story is only one of Knack's many issues. When it comes to the characters, they look bland and boring. Even as an artistic choice, it just feels lazy. Maybe the characters look as bland as they do so Knack can stand out, but this was a launched PlayStation 4 title, a first-party game from Sony themselves. The expectations were higher. Really, you can see the technical aspect of why Knack was made. The processing power of the PS4 being able to have so many little bits and pieces on screen in real time, individual pieces missing from Knack's form, and him collecting or losing these relics affecting his size, it's a lot and it is impressive. But put the overall package next to the other first-party launch game that was Killzone Shadowfall, and there's a huge difference. Maybe not one fairly comparable. Even the Ratchet & Clank games on the PlayStation 3 have a better style. And then there's Knack himself. Knack is a weird character. It's hard to look at Knack and think he's an iconic character, and a part of it could be because of his ever-changing look. When he's small, he can't speak, but as he increases in size, he obtains this super deep voice. It's almost bizarre, and Knack lacks any kind of internal conflict. There's even a part when an antagonist tries to get Knack to question his loyalty, but Knack doesn't even think about it. He follows commands without thought and doesn't think much for himself. He may get into some conflict or disagreement, but there's minimal depth for Knack. He's not relatable or enjoyable. Knack is a soldier without that word ever being thrown out there. And in a way, you could say that for Crash Bandicoot. He listens to his sister Coco or Uka Uka on what to do without much thought for himself, but what Crash Bandicoot has that Knack lacks is a personality. What Crash can't say, he will act out. He also has a memorable look. Sometimes a look that's less complicated stands out better. To help promote Knack, there was Knack's Quest, a free mobile game that launched a bit before the main game in November 2013. It was a tile-matching puzzle game, a Bejeweled or Candy Crush clone for iOS and Android devices. A bit bland and forgettable, but its added bonus was the connectivity it had to the main game to help unlock special relics faster. On March 29, 2018, the connectivity between the two games was severed and Knack's quest was delisted sometime after. Ultimately, Knack was a game that was meant to send the message that the PlayStation 4 was not only going to cater to the hardcore gamer, according to Shuhei Yoshida, but would also be for the casual gamer. Though, when you have established franchises that would have made more of an impact like Ratchet & Clank, Jak and Daxter, and Sly Cooper, Knack is a questionable and a risky choice. Mark Cerny would later reflect on Knack, admitting that making the game to appeal to everyone was a mistake, but Knack's mixed reception is a lesson learned for everyone, and as developers that's important. Mark Cerny may have one of the greatest minds in video games today, but Knack isn't one of Cerny's finest moments among his portfolio of greater successes. With the big joke Knack became on the internet, one you're still bound to come across today, no one expected a sequel to be announced in 2016. In reality, it shouldn't have been too surprising. Knack was a launch game, even a packing game with some PlayStation 4 consoles globally, and when there isn't a huge lineup of new games to play and no backwards compatibility, a game like Knack gets picked up. With all of that, Knack sold around 2 million copies, a number most games would love to sell. So the sequel arrived in 2017. Knack 2 continues the adventures of Knack and his friends and does what a sequel should do, improve upon everything flawed in the original, and greatly improve it does. Knack 2 is the game Knack should have been. If the plot of Knack 2 didn't heavily reflect on the original, I would say to skip the first game, but it's probably best to play them in order just to see how much of an improvement Japan's studio made. This time around, Mark Cerny had little involvement in comparison to the first. The direction has improved, the script is 10 times better thanks to a writer of the God of War games coming in to write it, and the story is actually interesting and intriguing. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it captures the attention. Knack still isn't the best character out there, but is more likable, and there are actual conflicts between him and his friends. The concept of Knack himself has been simplified and really is for the best. He can still gain and lose relic pieces, increase and decrease in size, but now it isn't nearly as intricate piece by piece, and the game now tells you how tall Knack is. It's a better concept than what it was before and doesn't look as odd as sometimes it could have been. Combat has been significantly upgraded with more combos and abilities. There's now a skill tree that can be upgraded to increase all of this. A point in the game's story even mocks the original game for Knack only being able to simply punch and kick. If you can admit your flaws and laugh about it, it's made all the better for it, and I love the developers acknowledging this. And then there are QuickTime events during cutscenes that make the game and Knack's abilities feel more exciting. Maybe outdated for many in 2017, but it helps to keep your attention focused on the game and the story. One of the biggest improvements in Knack 2 are the character models and the graphics. It's a massive overhaul. The game still retains its own art style, but is more welcoming to the eyes and doesn't feel cheap. Knack, the characters, and the environments all feel like they blend in together. The original Knack did include offline cooperative multiplayer, but it was a sequel that really advertised this. Perfect for the idea of Knack being a family-friendly game. One player would be red and the other would be a blue version of Knack. Plus, the second player can join or drop out at any time without disrupting the game. And since the second game is more enjoyable, cooperative multiplayer just adds to the experience. Knack 2 is the game Knack should have been, and it's a shame the sequel didn't sell nearly as much as the original. Everything is how it should have been. It feels like a better package, controls very well, and the characters actually become likable. Knack 2 has its own identity and doesn't feel basic and boring like the original. It's a solid game many should consider picking up. Even if you don't play the first, Knack 2 is highly enjoyable. Knack certainly won't be a series most will look back on fondly, but it is a series that was given a chance to improve upon itself and accomplish this with, in my opinion, a highly underrated sequel. Will we ever see a Knack 3? I doubt we will, especially with Japan Studio's closure, but then again, I don't think anyone was ever expecting Knack 2. For now, Knack will remain in PlayStation's graveyard of forgotten games until one day Sony decides to resurrect the series for some more Knack-tastic adventures. But let me know in the comments below, did you enjoy either of the Knack games? Was Knack truly the next Crash Bandicoot? Please be sure to like and subscribe for future content, and since Knack was developed by Japan Studio, why not check out my video on remembering Japan Studio? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.